It is finally time to get some seeds started. It's the last week of March right now. I like to start my tomatoes and my peppers. Those are a little bit longer growing than some of the other stuff. I like to start those about 6 weeks before I'm going to plant them out. Our last frost date average around here is around April 15th. But it's usually a couple of weeks, 3 weeks or so after that before I can plant them out into the garden. So I look at really about Mother's Day as the date that I plan on putting out peppers and tomatoes, and everything else basically that gets started. It's really right around Mother's Day. So we're just about 6 weeks from that date, and that's a good time to go ahead and get my peppers and tomato plants started. I don't like to start them too much earlier than that because they get so big. It's hard to find enough potting mix, first of all, to pot them up that many times. They tend to get root bound. It's just, I think it does a little bit better if I just wait and be patient and give them, like I said, about 6 weeks before I plan on planting them out, which is usually going to be right around Mother's Day. So that's where we're at today. I'm actually out in the garden because I'm going to be starting some seeds in the garden today, peppers and tomatoes. Even though it's way too early, I've got a special method to do that with. I've used in the past. It's worked really well. And then other times it hasn't worked really well, but it's not that difficult, so we're going to try it. Basically, it's a version of winter sowing. If you're familiar with winter sowing, what most people do is they take a milk jug, cut it open, so you have a hinge basically, put some potting mix in there, put your seed in there, close it, tape it shut, and then basically set it outside, and whenever it's ready, it goes ahead and sprouts and grows. Now I'm going to be doing the same kind of thing, but instead of cutting it open and putting potting mix inside the milk jug itself, I just cut the bottom of the milk jug out. I'm planting directly in the ground, putting the milk jug over it to act like a little greenhouse. I've done this in the past and it worked incredibly well. I got great starts. I don't like to start those too early either because what happens is the tomato plant outgrows the jug pretty quick. So if I start those today, we should be doing pretty good on those. And the benefit is I don't have to worry about hardening them off. I don't worry about any of that. I just, whenever it's time, I just take the milk jug off and the tomato plant's good to go. And I don't have to transplant or anything. But I'm not going to rely solely on that method because it has let me down in the past. So I am going to be starting seeds indoors as well. We'll be covering all of that in this video. So let's get to it. First thing I'm going to do, get some seeds started in the ground here. Pretty simple process, but I'll take you along and show you how I'm going to do it. I may not be completely in camera yet, but let me get situated here. Put some knee pads on because the ground's kind of wet. Keep my pants from getting too wet on the knees. The ground's actually plenty soft enough. I don't need them to kneel down on here, but keeps them from getting too wet and too muddy. So again, this is a pretty simple process. So I'm going to be starting some tomatoes and peppers in this method. Not basil. There we go. First thing I'm going to start is a couple of beefsteak tomatoes. Now what I tend to grow are slicing tomatoes, I guess. I tend to grow 2 of those. That's plenty for us to eat fresh, and then the rest of my tomatoes are all paste tomatoes that I primarily focus on canning. So this is the tomato I'm going to be growing right now. This is a Mortgage Lifter Red. This is my favorite kind of beefsteak. It's an heirloom. I don't know if you'd call it a beefsteak, but it's pretty close to a beefsteak slicing tomato. Good to eat fresh. And let me get this package open. The process is pretty simple. It's pretty much the same as starting seeds indoors. So we're going to get a couple of seeds out here. Hang on, I can't get the package to cooperate with me. Come on. I'll start 3 seeds in here, give me a better chance of germination. And it's just like I said, just like starting seeds indoors. So I'm going to rough up the soil here. You don't want to plant these too deep. So basically I just rough the soil up. I'm going to put my 3 seeds in there, just kind of press them in, and then lightly cover them to give them what they need. And then this is my greenhouse that goes over the top of them. Just a milk jug. I've cut the bottom of it out, pushed a few landscape staples through it, and that's going to be my greenhouse. So that goes on, lid off, and just push it into the ground, and that's it. Then we're going to walk away from it, and as it rains, everything, leave the lid off. You don't want it to, you need it to vent because, with the sun beating down on it, this is going to warm up pretty quick. But that's all there is to this process. I'm going to walk away from it, hopefully it sprouts and grows when it's time. Like I said, this method has worked really well for me in the past, and then sometimes it hasn't worked really well. The times that it hasn't worked really well, I think were drier seasons. So if it's really dry, now we're getting, this time of year we typically get rain a couple of times a week, so I don't need to worry about it. But you know, when I had a drier season when we weren't getting that much rain, you may need to come out and actually put some water in here occasionally, you know, maybe once a week or something like that. But that's it. That's all there is to this method. This will hold it down here so the wind doesn't blow it away, and we're good to go. So let me show you kind of how I put this together. It's pretty simple. I just took my pocket knife, cut the bottom of the milk jug out. I did leave a little bit of a lip here so it sits down closer to the ground, not too much of a vent there. Got a couple of landscape staples. Get good quality landscape staples. These are contractor grade. They're much beefier than the ones you get in, like most of the time you get in a like a Lowe's or a home, you know, big box store. And then I just they're kind of hard to get through here. They might be easier if you were to heat them up, but it's not that hard. And then just push them through the side and pull them down. Now they're going to want to fold in, but whenever I push that into the ground, that'll be fine. And I just do one on each side, and that should be plenty to hold them together. Make sure you don't poke through your glove. I don't know if I poked through it or just pinched it there, but anyway. There we go. And again, pinched it. There we go. Got it through. And we're good to go. And the reason I'm wearing gloves is just to keep my fingernails from getting too dirty, messing in the dirt, because it's kind of a pain to clean out from underneath the fingernails. I'm not really squeamish about getting dirt under my nails or anything like that. It's just, it's a little bit easier. All I gotta do is peel these off and I'm all dry. So that's pretty much it. I'm gonna go ahead and plant out. I got quite a few to plant out here. There's no sense in you watching me. I mean, it's the same thing for peppers, tomatoes, any of those kinds of things. The key is, again, don't bury the seeds too deep. You just want them just barely covered. And then that's really it. Now I do try to make sure that whenever I put the milk jug on, that I just left the labels on. I want to put it on the side where the labels are not showing, facing the sun. I don't know if it makes any difference at all, but that's the only thing. That's what I'm doing. So anyway, let me get these done. We'll get right back with you. All right, well, I got tomatoes planted. I actually ran out of milk jug, so I didn't get any of my peppers started, but you know, we're getting more milk jug. I mean, as soon as I get some more, I'll come out here and start some more. I must have cut myself because I got blood on me. Oh, a little scratch. On blood thinners now, so a little scratch just bleeds like crazy. I don't know if you can see that. I don't know, I didn't even notice it. Just a little bitty tiny scratch right there. I got blood all through my glove, but I'll go clean that up real quick. Anyhow, where was I going with that? Lost track. Oh, so as I get more milk jugs, I'll come out and put some peppers and get those started. But again, I'm not going to rely totally on this method. The one year it failed on me was the one year I decided to rely totally on this method. It had worked so well for the past. I'd done it a couple of times and it worked so well. I thought, I'm not even going to bother starting seeds indoors because this works so well, and it failed. It didn't work at all that year. I ended up having to go buy tomatoes. So here's for the hoping that it works this year, but I'm not going to rely on this. I'm going to go ahead and start seeds indoors as well. I'm going to take you guys along for that. It's really a pretty simple process. We're going to get to that next. All right, so starting these seeds indoors is really pretty easy. The only thing I'm starting today is peppers and tomatoes. Most other things start the same way. The one thing I will say is you can see the cells I'm using. These are fairly large because peppers and tomatoes grow pretty big, pretty fast. So you want to use a pretty good sized cell to start them in. Now they will be transplanted up as soon as they get going basically, but it's still a good idea to use a pretty good sized cell to start them in. If you're starting like something like lettuce or onions, or you don't need to use anywhere near this size cell. You can get away with a much smaller much smaller cell, so you don't use as much seed starting mix, because we are using a seed starting mix to start these, and that's kind of important when you're starting these indoors. There's going to be a lot of moisture in here. This seed starting mix has no nutrients in it, and this is just the one that they had available. You can get whatever one you want. What you want to look for is seed starting mix though, which is basically, I think it's probably, yeah, this is coconut coir, peat moss, and vermiculite. That's it. So there's no nutrients in here, and what that's going to help do is the seed doesn't need nutrients to get started. It's got plenty to get it going until it gets its first set of true leaves, and that's when it's going to need some nutrients. But this is plenty to get it going, but yet it's going to keep down on things like mildew and mold and fungus gnats and all those kinds of things that can grow in your seed trays whenever you get a lot of moisture in them. So the process is pretty easy. Let me open this bag up here real quick. And whoops, I cut too shallow. Try that again. There we go. And then I just fill the trays up, basically. Now, one thing you will want to do, this stuff is super dry. Let me see if I can show you. So when I start filling these trays up with it, I mean, you can see it's super dry and super fluffy. And when this gets wetted down, it's going to compact down. So you want to, what you want to do basically is fill your trays up. I'm going to do it over the bag so I don't lose very much of this stuff everywhere. And just fill them all the way up, basically. Hang on just a second here. Let me get them filled up. And then I'm going to press them down a little bit, and I'm going to water them and get them good and wet and saturated so that I don't have nearly as much compaction. You want to make sure you do that before you put your seeds in, because what's going to happen is as you water this, it's going to sink down, and if you put your seeds in there, there's a good chance they're going to float up to the top. You know, if you start to water it, you know, all kinds of things. And not only that, but they'll compact down, and then you'll have all kinds of room left in your pot. So, and you'll have air bubbles, and it's just not good for your seeds. So you want to get this watered in real good. Let me get it saturated. You might be able to tell, I don't know if you can or not, but the water just kind of sits on top there. So I want it good and wet. Let that soak down through. And while that's taking place, it'll take a few minutes. I'm going to go ahead and fill up another one of these and do the same thing. Now, what I'm using here, these are cheap seed starting trays, basically seed starting, I don't even remember what they're called, seed starting containers, but these are reused from years past. You don't have to use that if you don't want to mess with repotting. This is what I typically repot my tomatoes up into, is just a solo cup. It's got a couple of holes drilled in the bottom for drainage. And this will be filled with potting soil, not seed starting mix, but potting soil, which is a mix of compost, peat moss, and perlite. And that's what gives the plant the nutrients. Now you can fertilize at that point if you want to. I don't mess with fertilizing because I've got compost in there and it's going to work just fine to fertilize my plants. But once they get their first set of true leaves, they sprout, get their first set of true leaves, they get potted up into this. Now if you don't want to mess with that, you can start with this, but do not fill this all the way up with seed starting mix. You're going to waste a bunch of it. Fill it up with a good potting mix up to about there, and then to the top, maybe inch and a half at the most. Put your seed starting mix to get your seeds started into, and as it starts, it'll grow the roots down into the potting mix, and you can save some money that way, save a little bit of effort. So let me water these down, pump up my waterer, get it going. And this stuff's kind of hydroponic or hydrophobic, so it doesn't want to take on water. It's going to take a few minutes for that to saturate down in there. You're going to have to water it several times to get it going. So sometimes it might be better to actually dump all your seed starting mix into a large container and water it down before you even pack your trays. It may make it a little bit easier in some ways. Because this is definitely the hardest part, is getting this stuff rehydrated. And we're just going to wait a few minutes for that to take place. Alright, so finally, it takes a while for those things to rehydrate. So I mean, I was just spraying water, letting it soak down. It took a long time. But now we're ready to go ahead and get seeds started. All right, so starting them in here is pretty easy. I mean, what I'm going to do is, let's see how many seeds I got in here. Is that it? Amount? Not very many. So I put about 2 seeds in each cell, and what I don't do is I don't cover them up until I've got them all in there, because otherwise you'll forget which ones you put them in and which ones you didn't. So 2 seeds in each cell. These are tomato seeds. One of the biggest mistakes that most people make whenever they're starting seeds is that they plant the seeds too deep. Now, tomato seeds are pretty small seeds, so there's no need to plant them so deep. These are older seeds that I'm planting right now, last year's, so I'm going to actually put 3 in each one with those and make sure that they are doing all right. So then I'm just going to push them down, brush a little bit of soil over the top of them, and that's it. Again, you don't want to go too deep with these, just under the surface basically. And that's pretty much it with starting tomatoes. I mean, that's all we got to do. Oh, I didn't get those in the middle at all. Move those over. Okay, tomatoes are planted. Those are Amish paste tomatoes in that first one. I'm going to do 1 more of those. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I might do 2 more. I might do this many. And then don't forget to put a label on them, because you will forget. All right, 3 seeds. I'm actually putting, because these are older seeds, I'm putting quite a few in each one. Chances are I'll have more than 1 sprout, and I'll end up having to thin them out just to the strongest one, which is not a big deal. I just want to make sure I get good germination. With newer seeds, I don't worry about that too much, but these are a couple of years old. I said they were last year. I think they were actually the year before. So there we go. Tomato seeds are started. Well, the Amish paste are anyway. And let me put these back in the right container. Yep, these are them. Okay, now let me get some labels made here real quick. I just put abbreviations on there. I know what AP means, so I've got 3 of them. So that helps me to remember what they are. Okay, so though Amish paste tomatoes planted. Now, I've got some peppers and tomatoes. They all plant out the same way. There's no sense in you watching me plant every single one of these out. What I will tell you is, if you've got larger seeds, they're going to go a little bit deeper. Smaller seeds are going to go a little bit shorter. But again, don't plant them too deep. The general rule of thumb is to plant them about as deep as what the seed is wide. For some of your plants, though, you're going to go a little bit deeper. The package should tell you. Most packages tell you, and these don't say exactly. Yeah, these say 1/8 of an inch deep. So usually if you look on the back of your seeds, it tells you how deep to plant them. Tomato seeds and pepper seeds are so small, they don't go very deep. Some of the things like okra seeds are a little bit bigger. Those are going to go a little bit deeper, but I direct sow all that stuff. I don't worry about starting that indoors. I've got a long enough growing season. I'm in Southwest Missouri, Zone 6B, I believe. So I don't worry about starting those indoors. I just start those outside. Peppers and tomatoes take such a long time to get going that I go ahead and start those indoors. But there's really not much else to do here. I'm going to get my peppers, my tomatoes all started here, and then I'll come back and I'll talk to you about what the next step is, what we're going to do with these to make sure that they sprout and germinate. All right, so everything's planted out. It doesn't look like much. You know, you watch other channels and you see, you know, they plant out things. Man, they got whole trays full of them. Just all kinds of stuff going on. And move this one down here, see if that helps. Yeah, there it does. And I don't really actually start all that many things indoors. I start most of it direct sow in the garden because there's no reason to. You know, first of all, I'm just growing for myself. I'm not growing for market or anything like that, so I don't need to worry about producing huge amounts of things. I've got more than enough tomatoes started. You know, everything else, there are some things that don't like to be transplanted. Green beans don't like to be transplanted. Most of your root crops, things like radish and that kind of stuff, don't like to be transplanted. I could definitely start some lettuce and transplant that out, but all that stuff grows pretty fast. There's no need for me to start it indoors. I can just wait until it's time to start outside and start it outside. Things like squash, zucchini, pumpkin, watermelon, all that stuff, it grows so incredibly fast and it gets so incredibly big so quick that I don't like to start those things indoors ahead of time. I just start them out in the garden. If you start them indoors ahead of time, what you end up with is this monstrous plant by the time it's, you know, and you've got to find a pot big enough. You got to keep potting it up and find room on a shelf under a light for it to grow out. So I don't bother growing most of those things out indoors. My tomatoes and my peppers are about the only things. I will do some herbs. I'm going to wait a little while. Some basil, cilantro, and dill. Cilantro I'll probably direct sow. Dill and basil I'll probably start indoors, but I'm going to wait a little while on those because I don't want them to be, if I start them now, they're going to be bolting before any of my other stuff is ready. And I want the dill for pickles. I want the basil to go with my tomatoes. So I'm going to wait a little while to get that stuff started out. Let's see, what else? There's not a whole lot to go from here. I mean, they need to be damp. They need to be kept damp until they sprout. Tomatoes are probably going to sprout first. You're looking at probably 7 to 10 days, somewhere right around in there, if your conditions are right. Both tomatoes and peppers really like warm soil for them to be able to germinate. So put them in a warm spot in your house. They don't need light to germinate. They don't need light, so put them in a warm spot in your house, on top of a refrigerator. I just use a shelf in my spare room. It's right by a heating vent. It stays plenty warm in there. You could invest in a heat mat if you wanted to, put underneath it, and turn that on to warm it from the bottom, and that can help with your germination. I've never found it necessary myself, but it is something you can do. You're not going to want to set these outside and expect them to germinate. It's still pretty chilly out. Right now it's really nice, but it's getting cold at night. It's just too cold for them. I want to put them indoors in a nice warm spot in the house. I use this humidity dome. This is a specially made one. You can buy these little, it comes with the tray and the humidity dome, and usually little cells that you can fill up and plant things out in. About $10 in any big box store this time of year, but anyway, just hang on to them. You can use them over again. You don't have to use this. You could just put a piece of cardboard over the top of it or whatever, just to kind of keep it from drying out. I will water them from the top with this sprayer right here. This is pretty easy. Puts out a pretty nice, whoops, let me pump it up a little more. You can see it maybe. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's a pretty nice fine mist. It's not going to disturb the soil too much. So I'll keep them watered with that, keep them damp until they sprout. And then once they sprout, remove the humidity dome. You don't want to water them from the top anymore. Then I'll start watering them from the bottom. And basically I'll just put enough water in the bottom of the tray. It'll soak up through and water them from the bottom. But until they get sprouted, you're going to need to keep them nice and damp. Keep the humidity dome on. Mist them down once or twice a day, however much it takes to keep that nice and damp. Because where it dries out, it's going to be that top layer of soil wherever that seed is. That's where it's going to dry out the fastest, and you need to keep that watered and keep it nice and damp. Let's see, not sitting in water. You don't want it like pooling water, but you want to keep it nice and damp and don't let it dry out too much. Peppers are going to take a little longer. They can take up to 2 weeks to sprout. So, you may be taking a little while. Once these sprout, I'll come back and do additional videos, but once they do sprout, their first leaves are going to look, you're going to have to wait till they get to their first set of true leaves before you worry about transplanting them out to bigger containers. You could do it earlier, but there's no reason to. Wait until they get that size. You should be able to tell when their first true leaves come in. The first leaves that come in are not true leaves. So you get another set that come in, and those are going to look like tomato leaves or pepper leaves or whatever, and that's going to be their true leaves. Then transplant them out or fertilize them, one of the two. You do need, once these sprout, they need to be put under lights, or you're going to get your seedlings are going to get leggy. And that means they're going to grow really tall and spindly and start falling over. That means you just don't have enough light. Don't rely on a sunny window. That's not going to be enough light. You're going to need to put them under some kind of grow light. Now, I just use cheap shop lights. They're 4-foot shop lights with LED bulbs. Get 6,500 Kelvin. That's daylight temperature of the bulb. Not temperature as in like how hot and how cold it is to the touch, but color temperature of the bulb. It's going to be a daylight spectrum is what you want. You don't need full spectrum lighting, but you do need lights. And I use two lights over each tray, or over each row. I can set several trays next to each other. But 2 lights will cover this well. If you just have one right down the middle, you're going to need to move your tray back and forth, because what will happen is your plants will grow towards the light, and you want them to grow straight. When you put the lights on them, you want it just almost touching the plant, as close as you can get it to the plant without touching it, and just raise them up as the plant starts to grow. Or you can, stack your tray up to the light and lower it down as the plant starts to grow. But again, you want very little clearance between the light and the plant itself. And that's pretty much it on getting these guys started. Like I said, I'll come back and do additional videos as we go, but that's it. I mean, I'm going to go set these on a warm tray. I'm going to mist them down every day, once or twice a day, depending on how dry they are. And then once they sprout, we'll get going. Probably here in about 2 weeks, somewhere right around in there. We should have all of these sprouted for the most part. And don't give up on them too quick. If they haven't sprouted in 2 weeks, hang in there. It may just be that it's a little cool. It may take them a little longer. You may have planted them a little deeper, and that may take them a little longer to poke through. But generally speaking, they're going to do pretty well. So anyway, that's it for today's video. Just getting seeds started. A pretty nice day out. I've got tomatoes. I do need to get some more milk jugs. Go out here and put some peppers out there. I'm hoping I can get those done as well. And then we got about another month, a little over a month and a half roughly before everything else gets going. So thanks for watching. As always, God bless.